Well, hello and a warm welcome back to the teaching series, The Jesus That John Knew. We left last time thinking about Nicodemus and this particular problem that Nicodemus was beset with, which was that for him to come to understand the things of the Spirit, he would have to start thinking as a spiritual, lateral thinking man, instead of simply being a linear, rational thinking man. And Jesus has posed a real teaser for him, if you will, because he said to him that Nicodemus, you must be born from above. And Nicodemus is caught in this quandary trying to understand what he means. But here was our statement: unless a person is reborn from above, he cannot see the kingdom of heaven. Now that's really important, because it's worth understanding that it's not so much that the kingdom of heaven is above, but that the kingdom of heaven needs to be seen from above. We are seated with him in heavenly places, says Paul. And so we have, if you will, an aerial view of the things of the Spirit, and that's very, very important to understand that. You see, because when we tend to think about the kingdom of God in terms of a heaven or a hell, or an earth and a heaven, and so on and so forth, and we tend to think of them in terms of territory rather than thinking that of the kingdom of God as being a sphere of influence, then I think we begin to stumble and begin to make some mistakes. But really what's being said here is this, is when a person is born from above, he tends to see things from an above perspective. And it's amazing how different things look when you look at the full picture rather than looking just through the keyhole of a particular situation or circumstance. How many times have each one of us found ourselves in situations where we've looked through the keyhole of our life and looks to be no way out, it looks to be a very bleak situation, but if we are able to step back and take a wider view or an aerial view and look down, there we would find ourselves in the very balcony of heaven where the great cloud of witnesses are gathered together, and see what God is doing in the midst of it. You see, it is one thing for us to be able to see the inward in the inward. I mean, of course, that's a great spiritual sense of insight. If you can see the spiritual in the spiritual, that's wonderful. But let me say this to you, you have to have a completely renewed mind to be able to see the inward in the outward. And I think one of the things that this statement is wanting to say to me, at least, is this, is you need to be born from above in order to see the inward in the outward, in order to see, if you like, the sacred in the secular, because there really is no such thing as secular, there's only sacred. And once you begin to understand that, and you are someone who's born from above, and you see with a Christ perspective, then that becomes a really completely different way to see things. There's a little note that I posted on my Facebook this week about with a picture of a stick of rock, and it just reminded me of the whole point of what it is to be fully human, that no matter if Christ is the rock, and no matter where you bite into the rock, Christ is right at the centre. He's at the centre of all of us, of each of us, in each of our circumstances, each of our comings and goings. Christ is right at the centre. And as I made the note on the blog, and somebody else made the same point as well, it doesn't get any sweeter than that. But Nicodemus is troubled. But how can a person be born when he's old? Surely you're not saying to me he has to be reborn into his mother's womb again, are you? And Jesus' response, as I said to you before, is to draw him deeper into the mystery. Now you see, it's very interesting the way that Jesus deals with him, because, and I think this is quite an important thing for us to understand. Steve McVeigh and I, when we were teaching in the most recent conference we did together, our Radically Better conference in Atlanta, we were keen to make the point that for us, the difference in these radical conferences, as opposed to perhaps a foundational course that Steve or I might run, is this, is that we don't see our primary role as to answer the questions. What we see our primary role as being is to question the answers. There's a lovely way in which the Eastern people, the Eastern mystical people would teach. I remember having this conversation with Dave Bilbrough once, my good friend, and he said to me, what they would say to you in the East is, now you have understood, I will answer your question. I think that's a really very nice point. Now you've understood, I'll answer your question. And so what Jesus is doing is he's going to take Nicodemus deeper into the mystery. He's going to draw him deeper in still. And so he's got to understand that no, Jesus isn't talking about this business about him just going back into his mother's womb. And we talked about that last time, the idea of being born of the flesh, and that which is born of flesh is flesh, and being born of the Spirit. And that's really very important. You see, when you're talking about the spirit realm, you're talking not about reformation, you're talking about regeneration. And what Jesus has in mind here is a total transformation. Now, of course, he says, remember, he says, you don't understand where the wind comes from, but you cannot deny what it does. And so it is with people that are of the Spirit. You don't know where they're coming from or even where they're going to, but you cannot deny what they do. And of course, the reason why Nicodemus has come to see Jesus in the first place is that he cannot deny what he's done. He's seen the signs. The evidence is overwhelming. There's no sense in which that can be denied. You see, the truth of the matter is that just as the wind is capable of uprooting trees and overturning tables, it also uproots ideologies and overturns religions. It turns water into wine, it turns bitterness into forgiveness, it turns hate into love, it turns fear into faith. But you don't know where the Spirit comes from. And where it comes and where it goes, nobody knows. But we can't deny what it does. So, alright, Nicodemus says, but how can a man be born when he's old? I'm not getting that. And Jesus says, unless a man is born of the water and of the Spirit. Now, a lot of people have stumbled at this point because a lot of people have understood this to mean that unless you're baptized in water, you can't be born again. Well, I'm not sure, well, in fact I am sure, but I'm sure that that's not what the expression water means here, because when to be spoken of being born of water means to be born naturally. You're speaking about the natural birth, and to be born of the Spirit means a supernatural birth. And the thing of it is this is about a theology of the kingdom, and this is real kingdom theology now. Now, of course, we all know from Matthew's Gospel that Jesus gave us this incredibly important instruction. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added to you. Now, you see, that again has created some confusion in our minds, because entering into the kingdom is a state of mind, not a place in time. So understand that when Jesus talks about entering into the kingdom, he's talking about a state of mind, which Paul calls the renewing of your mind, not a physical place in time. The kingdom is about a royal power. It's about kingship. It's about dominion. It's about rule. It's not to be confused with an actual physical kingdom, but rather more to do with a right or an authority or a rule over a kingdom, if you like. And it's most important that you understand that, because the nature of the kingdom is about this rule of God. Now, the difference between law and grace is the difference between the rule of God and the rules of God. And we're not talking about the rules of God, we're talking about the rule of God. And the Messiah's kingdom is any territory, if you will, any sphere, any space, any individual, if you want, of which the Messiah has rule. Well, of course, he has rule over all spheres and all kingdoms, but it's when that rule is acknowledged that you begin to move as a kingdom person. And that's a really wonderful, wonderful thought. But there is a religious paradigm and there is a spiritual paradigm. And when we come back next time, we're going to talk about that, because we want to understand that for Nicodemus, he's going to have to lay aside this idea of the flesh, because flesh begets flesh. Flesh is about self-effort, about self-improvement, about self-denial. And none of these things will enable you to see the kingdom of heaven. In fact, they're leaven, not heaven. And we're going to have to see what that means. Because for Nicodemus thinks that when Jesus talks about being a born-again Christian, what he means really to say to Nicodemus is that you have to be a start-again Christian. He's thinking that the Lord is talking to him about starting over again, about rededication. But nothing could be further from the Lord's mind. He's not talking about becoming a start-again Christian. He's talking about being born again. Alright, well that's enough for now, but next time we'll come back and we'll have a look into this in more detail. God bless you.